In the first demonstration, we did a single yellow bind all the way up the guide foot. Now I'm going to show you how to do a simple trim. So we're going to do a few mils of trim, of green, and then yellow for the rest of the guide. I've chosen those two colours just to make it easy for you to see. So the first thing we do is we start with the trim, and again, we tape it to the blank above the guide that we're binding. So we're binding in, if you're binding in this direction, you always tape the tag end above in the direction that you're binding. So nice big loose wraps, and then square it off about where you want to start binding. So in this case I'll start there, and I'll pop over the thread the previous bind just like so. So I'll just come over and then try to keep it straight from there. Again, just use the burnishing tool to straighten up that bind. Okay, so I've done about 4 mils of trim. Now I'm ready to start with the actual bind colour. So there's enough bind there to lock that in. You only need about 3 or 4 binds to actually lock it in. So I can release that. And I'll grab the blade, keep the blade flat, and pull the tag over the blade. So once you've cut that tag, now I'll start to do some loose binds forward, and we won't see that once we've completed the bind, but all I'm going to do is tape that to the blank and give that a snip. Now we're going to start the actual bind colour. So I'm starting with the yellow. So I'll tape that to the blank again, above the guide in the direction that we're binding. Head back down to where we want to start. And what I'll try and do is align where this bind starts. So I'll pop over that. See here, that's where that bind kind of ended, because I started to come out at an angle. So I'll try and pop over that, lock in that bind right there where it started to deviate from the main bind. There you go. So now I've locked that off and I've started to bind square along the blank, across the blank. I've probably done half a dozen binds there. So I'm going to release that yellow tag, and I've got all, here we go. I'm going to release the green tag as well. So now I'll cut off that green tag just by pulling on the tag and keeping the blade flat so that you don't cut the bind. Now I could probably cut that tag now anyway, the yellow one, but I prefer just to leave it in there for another few binds just to make sure that there's no risk of it coming loose later. I find that if the tag that you're binding over is nice and square, nice and straight, then it makes for a neater bind. Okay, I've well and truly done enough binds to lock that in. So now, again, scalp a blade, hold it flat so you don't dig into your bind, pull with the tag end, and there you go. Now I'm free to keep binding. Now we're ready to start to prepare for the end of the bind by putting the pull through in. Now remembering that this pull through is a loop of braid like that. I'm going to pull that through that way, so I'm going to leave the knot on this side. I'll just tape it to the blank. And pop it under this last bind. And then I'll just keep wrapping. So again, you want to bind all the way to the start of the shoulder of the guide. So by the shoulder I mean this section here. You want to go right into the corner, but you don't want to come up this ramp. The important thing here is the moment that you cut this tag end, that you maintain tension on the thread to stop it from coming undone. So I'll cut it, but I will keep tension on it with my hand. Just pull it through and keep that tension. Now with the other hand, I'm going to pull this tag end like so. So I've pulled that in a few mil, and then I'm going to cut that tag end just before, maybe another mil outside, so that I can, and the idea is that it's probably into about there is where the end of the pull through is. So by the time I pull that through with the pull through, there'll be no tag sticking out, like so. So that's the bind, and now just work it a little bit with the burnishing tool to spread out the bind and flatten out the thread a little bit. You don't overwork it too much or you'll damage the surface of the thread. Neaten up the ends. Make sure they're nice and square. And there you have it. So the few things to keep in mind when you're doing your binds. As you do each guide, you want to review them and make sure that the size of the trim is always the same on each one, and that the distance from the guide foot, from the start of the guide foot, is the same on each guide. Now, ideally, you'd start about 5 mil from the start of the guide foot. Here I've started about 10 mil, just so I can spend a bit more time showing you how to put the trim in. But 5 to 6 mil is fine. You don't want one guide to have a 10 mil lead, and then the next guide to have a 5 mil lead. It just won't look right. So as you go through, keep that in mind, and it will save you having to redo binds later on.